Hi, my name is Joe Weiler. I'm 37 years old, and I'm born and raised in Kamloops, British Columbia, and this is my story. I was raised in a very devoted Catholic family, and I remember as a young Catholic that the first moment that I've experienced the word in our home was when my father was speaking in downstairs and just preparing for the reading that he was doing that Sunday. So the Sundays were very special for us. We'd kind of have meals together. We'd come together at church with our grandparents and our family. We'd go over for dinner most Sundays and have a big meal there on Sundays, and it was always a good time to see the cousins and see how they're doing and play with them and enjoy that aspect of living and continuing to grow as a Christian. Yeah, so it was just a normal Tuesday evening. I was 15 years old at the time and just getting ready for bed, and I was saying my prayers. And usually when I'm saying my prayers, I usually just pray for my relatives and just make sure that they're protected, making sure that they're happy and healthy and all those good things. And so I just had a quick prayer and decided I wanted to kind of fall asleep. And as soon as I 2 minutes after the prayer, I basically heard an ambulance going up the street that we were on, and the first thought was basically to pray because I knew somebody was in need of help. So the first moment that I had, I prayed, and I just prayed for the person and made sure that they were looked after, and hopefully God would take care of them. And I then remember hearing a phone call from coming from the house, and the garage door also going up and down around 10 o'clock at night, and it was kind of unusual at the time for that to happen. So I was kind of concerned, but I basically just kind of fell asleep and went to bed. And the next thing I remember is when my dad came into my room and told me that my grandfather had passed away. It was November 7th, 2000. So I knew right then and there that the ambulance that I was praying for was going to my grandfather's house, and there was no mistaking of that. It was definitely shocking at the time. It was definitely difficult to comprehend. I was in disbelief. I felt like God had abandoned our family, and I believe that prayers were meant to be answered. And at 15 years old, you're kind of you're taught to pray, and if there's any issues that you have in your life, you'd pray about it, and usually most times God would answer those prayers. And not only did I pray for him once, I prayed for him twice that night, and both times it didn't seem to go the way that I wanted it to. So I was pretty devastated at that point, and I really didn't know what I wanted to do anymore. I lost my faith. I really felt kind of depressed. I was very anxious. Didn't really know why. I just figured it was maybe change of scenery would be good. So the next best thing for me to do was basically move as far away from Kamloops as I could. So not only was I leaving Kamloops, but I was also leaving my Christian life behind as well. So I was searching everywhere, and work just became work, and I felt like there was something missing, and I couldn't grasp it at all. So as I was continuing to work, as I was searching for something more, I thought maybe the best thing to do is for me to travel. So I continued to travel, and I went to Europe. That was the first place that I went to, and I basically decided that I thought I would be able to find something there. Maybe there was something in that area of the world that I could just find and allow myself to become somebody different. There was people there that were, between the ages of 20 to 35 years old, and we were all just kind of drinking and just having a good time. But there was always something that was missing in my life, and I just couldn't grasp it. So my next step from there was going to Australia to take a year-long trip out there, and I thought maybe a whole other side of the world would allow me to see something that I've never seen before, and hopefully, have some sort of peace that was missing. So in the beginning, it was going great. I was definitely having a good time meeting people. I was able to travel quite a distance, and I found myself in Western Australia working on a farm. And then the farmer would basically sign, paperwork saying that I've worked there for so many days, and then I would be able to get that second-year visa. So this was my next step. Basically, was to continue to work and live in Australia, and so I was on this farm basically in the middle of nowhere in Australia, and so I spent about 3 to 4 hours seeding, and felt pretty confident that day, and I thought it went pretty well. And then I just kind of retired for that evening and went back to my quarters. So I remember it was my mother's birthday, and I remember calling her, and I felt really lonely and sad and a little bit depressed, just kind of trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I was kind of by myself most nights, and there wasn't a whole lot to do in the town. So I remember phoning her and just happy to hear her voice, and just wish her happy birthday. And the next day it kind of changed my life. I ended up getting fired from the job just because things didn't really work out with them, and they didn't really think that I was capable of continuing on the farm. So basically the next day I was shipped out. He drove me back about 4 or 5 hours to the closest town, and from there I knew basically that I was needing to go back to Canada as my visa was running out. Just head back and kind of lick my wounds. Coming back to the real world kind of hit me pretty hard. So after some failed attempts finding work, after Christmas I decided that I would move back to Edmonton after a quick phone call from my previous employer. He was ready to hire me again, and quickly after Christmas I moved back up there. So at this point my anxiety was getting really bad. My depression was kind of setting in as well again. After a couple more trips to Europe, I virtually kind of came to a wit's end at my job in 2015. I couldn't work anymore. I was getting panic attacks at work, and it was getting extremely difficult to focus on the work at hand. And I ended up just leaving a note with the supervisor on his desk one of the nights, and the next day I drove back to Kamloops. I just kind of was wandering around the city. I wasn't expecting, nobody knew I was going to be there, but I ran into my cousin. She kind of bumped into me, and just seeing how I was doing, and I wasn't really in the mind frame to talk, or I was very mentally, emotionally fatigued, and at this point I was just trying to get over the situation that I just basically left work, and I ran away from all my responsibilities. So at that point I decided I was going to go see my parents and knock on their door and just tell them that I needed some help. So I was devastated, and like in my earlier years I was putting on these masks, and for work and for travel, and for meeting friends and all these things, and the wound was fresh, it was open, and I wasn't able to put these masks on anymore. And I can see all these steps along the way that God has brought me to this position that I am here today. And He wanted me to come back to Kamloops, and shortly after I talked to my parents, about a year later I ended up moving back full-time to Kamloops, and it took me about a year to finally get away from Alberta and finally cut ties with that area. So I ended up moving back and kind of refocusing on my life. At this point I was looking at spiritual things. I was trying to get any grasp. I had trouble sleeping at times, and I was listening to frequencies, trying to help my sleeping patterns, and looking for anything that would help. And I was given a Bible, and I was always told that Bibles have helped other people, and they're it's there for you to provide help in your life, and all the answers are in there. And so it was worth a shot, right? Like, so I was ready to take a chance and ready to read. So I started in Genesis. So as I was studying the Bible and learning more about the Word, it was starting to open up, and I was starting to understand things, and the words were starting to stick to me. And as I was learning about the Ten Commandments and watching these programs on Amazing Facts, it was extremely convicting to see that the Bible was alive, and the Word is alive, and everything that is in it is truth. And I continued to read and to understand a little bit more and more. And when I got to Exodus and reading the Ten Commandments, and it says to remember the Sabbath day, it was extremely overwhelming experience to understand it fully, because it was something that I've never really experienced before. I never really heard of the Sabbath at all, and it was definitely inspiring as God writes to remember, almost like we would forget about it. And so it was definitely, I was definitely convicted that day, and I was starting to watch more Amazing Facts with Doug Batchelor, and he really helped with, trying to understand the Bible and trying to understand what was going on in these chapters, and really helped that way. And I was always asked to go to this series with Doug Batchelor, and it was called Revelation Now, and it was at the church, and they were doing a live streaming of the series. And I didn't really have much interest in going to church or anything like that, and but with the world kind of the way it was at that time, I was really into kind of whatever information I could get. And so this Doug Batchelor, this pastor, he was talking about prophecy, and it really was powerful, and I've never seen scripture used that way to fulfill prophecy. The next Saturday I had to take a course for work. As soon as I woke up that morning, I felt sick to my stomach, and I just couldn't get it over. The whole day just felt ill, and I was kind of, anxiety was running through my veins, running through my body, and all these things were going through my mind. And luckily I got an hour worth of lunch, and I was able to kind of go past the church, and I wasn't hungry at all, but I was hungry for the Word that day. And I knew that evening there was another episode at the church, and I was ready to go and see that that next series. So it was really, really eye-opening, and very God was convicting me right then and there on the Sabbath. As I went to the church that evening, I just wanted anything to do with what was happening in real time, and what I needed to do in order to fulfill my life with good things and hope to come. And I was greeted at the door, and I was very excited. People were excited to see me, and I walked in and kind of just slowly walked into the sanctuary, and I found myself in the sanctuary and just ready for the series to come on. And I got a huge hug from my cousin Matt, and as he was coming up towards me, and he was in shock that I was there, and the look on his face was priceless that evening. And with everything that that went through my mind throughout those years, and all the times that I struggled, I knew God was lining this night to happen. For every chance that I had, He was giving me the opportunity to be with Him, and to have a relationship with Him. And it brought me to a lot of tears. It brought me to a lot of pain and suffering. But the one thing that I was starting to understand was I was trying to do it on my own. I was getting in the way of God's work. I was trying to move to the next city, move to the next country, move to somewhere else other than where I wanted to be, where God wanted me to be. And I struggled that way, and I was basically fighting him every step of the way. I was basically like Jacob in a sense, where I ran away from all, my family and friends and anything that, ever helped me in the beginning of my life, and I ran away from God too as well. So it was me in the end that allowed this to happen. It was me that didn't open up my heart to God in the beginning, and I should have just, from my grandfather's death, I should have just realized that God was still there with me. He wanted to protect me, and He was still aligning my path. He was still giving me a purpose in my life and wanting me to succeed. But I got in my own head, I got in my own life, and we're not able to fully live unless we live the way God wants us to live. So it was extremely eye-opening now that I can understand that he was not only there, but He was right by my side every step of the way. And I just want to share that night. It was on November 7th, 2020, when I walked into the church. So exactly almost to the hour, 20 years from the time I prayed for my family. It was almost the same hour, 20 years later. So I was walking in the wilderness for 20 years, and I was seeking for anything, any form of life, of anything that was abundant. And it's all in the Bible, it's all written in the Word, and I can definitely say that He brought me to this special time, this special place with all my family and friends, and I continue to serve Him and serve the Word. And so I just want to share that with all of you today, and I just want to express my gratitude to God and to Jesus and to everything that He's done for me in my life, because I wouldn't be here today without Him. First John 4:19, and it reads, "We love Him because He first loved us." So part of my testimony was about the Sabbath, Exodus 20:8 to 11. "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall do no work, you nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it." So in Revelation 12, verse 17, this is a verse about good and evil, about Satan versus God. Satan's trying to attack God's people, and God's saving them through Jesus' testimony. So 12, verse 17 in Revelation, it reads, "And the dragon was enraged with the woman, and he went to make war with the rest of her offspring, who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ."